The 51st Ludum Dare Game Jam just happened at the start of October, which is my fourth time participating. As usual, I really enjoyed it and wanted to break down the highlights of developing my game, Terminal Velocity. The theme was every 10 seconds, which I was kind of frustrated with at first. No great ideas came about immediately. The best one I had thought of was a game about short-term memory loss, like the movie 50 First Dates. Thankfully, my friend Colton was happy to brainstorm with me and had a lot of ideas. Not all of them were feasible, but it's important during the brainstorming phase that nothing gets rejected. Even a bad idea can inspire good follow-ups, or we can distill the good parts out of an idea and mix them into another game. We ended up liking the racing game idea the most. It would be randomly generated to be endless, and there would be checkpoints that the player has 10 seconds to reach. We would have been more aligned with the theme if we always set the clock to 10 seconds, but that felt too punishing, like the first mistake would be game over. Instead, we felt like it would be more fun if you could bank up time by playing well, so you could have mistakes later on and not lose right away. I've never made an endless runner before, but my mind was already working on the technical implementation while we were refining the gameplay details, and I was feeling confident that I could do it. I made my typical to-do list so that I could keep myself organized and work on the critical things before the nice-to-haves. The way I planned to do this was going to require more math and less assets, since programming is definitely my strength compared to 3D modeling. My idea was that I'd be able to connect the track pieces together and spin them around the connection axis, and place obstacles and checkpoints anywhere within those pieces. The alternative was making specific track pieces for checkpoints, hazards, and so on. I started working on my first draft in Blender. My first round was just going to include a straight piece, a slight curve, and an S-bend. If my connection math worked, this felt like it could actually be enough pieces to never feel repetitive. Later on, I might come back and make more pieces like a corkscrew and a loop. I had also decided that I wasn't going to try making the player actually drive on the track geometry. That seemed like it would be a nightmare for collisions and steering. Instead, I created a spline path along the center of each track piece, and the player would just be carried along that path. Before I go to sleep on Friday night, I like to make enough progress that I know the concept will indeed work. I didn't need to get the random generation up and running yet, so I just connected a few of the pieces manually. The other reason I do this is because I want to get a feeling very early on whether this game will end up fun or not. It's always promising when the first prototype with no art already gets me excited. And it goes on to the next path.
Baller.
Do it, around the S-bend. Oh man, through the curve. The next step was to add a player vehicle that would be offset from the center path, and could pivot around it to feel like you're changing lanes on the track. Unity's input system has been pretty nice here, in that I can set up my actions by name, such as steer, and then link any number of physical inputs to that action. Left and right arrow keys, A and D, even the shoulder buttons on a gamepad. This made it trivial to have controller support right out of the gate, instead of being added on late in development. A little bit of programming later, and we had a very buggy and unpolished version of player steering.
Really?
We're playable.
Wow.
It's hard to tell, but that's
crazy. It is not
spinning
hard
it
to
too.
tell.
Yeah. I knew I'd have to come back to the steering, but I was eager to keep pushing forward and started working on the random track builder next. Yet again, there would be some cleanup to do as the pieces didn't connect seamlessly, but I got this up and running. I did have to remove the curve pieces, which would become a recurring theme throughout development. Since the straight and S-bend pieces both started and ended on the same axis, a lot of the math just happened to work out. Using the curves threw a big wrench into that. Which kinda bummed me out, because I'm supposed to be good at math. The core of the game was mostly functional, but even with some different lighting settings, it was really hard to see the edges in the track. Time to go back to Blender and add some more detail. I decided to add a bevel between each face of the track. By putting these edges on a separate submesh, I would be able to assign a different material to them in Unity. Over the course of these games I've made for Ludum Dare, I've unintentionally started to zero in on my art style. I found that I prefer materials instead of textures, and I always like to have glowing lights. Before wrapping up for the night, I remade the straight and S-bend pieces from a more mathematical perspective, so that I'd know exactly where their start and end points were. If I tried to be more free-form artistic with them, I was always going to end up with slight seams that would look really jarring for my players. Saturday morning I did some of that cleanup work I mentioned earlier. I also put the curve pieces back in and worked on the math that would make them connect smoothly. Once I got it looking good, I showed the track generation to a friend that's also participating in the jam. We were both pretty happy until he pointed out that the track was always just going left. I realized this was because I had prevented the pieces from spinning around their connection axis. As soon as I re-enabled that, the curves broke again. I fought this issue for most of the morning and eventually gave up and decided the track was already interesting enough with just the straight and S-bend pieces. Next up, I started working on the main gameplay mechanics of having a clock that counts down, and checkpoints that will give you 10 more seconds. As part of the difficulty ramp of the game, the checkpoints were going to spawn farther and farther apart as the game went on. I picked out a formula that would take the overall time of the current run as an input and give me a distance for how far away the next checkpoint should be. For now, the checkpoints were just represented as simple blue planes. The next feature I worked on was the flip mechanic. I wanted players to be able to hit one button to flip to the opposite side of the track. Getting the animation and the camera to feel just right took a lot of iterations, but I'm pretty happy with how it ended up. Once that was done, it was time to start making some obstacles. I had a couple different things in mind, including basic walls that would just stop you, laser traps that would kill you right away, and anti-boosters that would slow you down. As per usual in a game jam, some ideas have to get cut in order to finish on time. I ended up just making the laser traps, and they would slow you down if you hit them. I also realized that I could just reuse a single laser beam that I'd modeled to make quite a few different traps. The boosters came next. Similar to the checkpoints, these started off as just a simple green plane. After adding the boost speed logic to the player, the gameplay was really starting to shape up. While I was making some booster variations, I realized this was a good opportunity to better utilize the flip mechanic. I would add a booster floating in the middle of the track that you had to flip through. Colton came around again for some more playtesting. He had a great idea to put red lights at each of the laser traps that would illuminate the walls. This would give the player an idea that a hazard was coming up just around the corner, so they had a little more time to react. His testing also revealed that the collision detection was maybe a little unfair, which sparked a good idea to make them undersized. So eventually when we get textures of
Oh, I swear I maybe missed it, but maybe
that
not.
reminded me. I want to make those gliders smaller. The virtual boxes around those.
Gotcha.
But if you were just passing it and doing a dodge, then sure, I'll let you slide through one of the edges.
Do you have lasers that the only place to go through it is the middle?
I
Do you have to
don't
jump?
yet. That was such a good idea to bring even more depth to the game. I modeled up a center ring in Blender and added the same laser beams around it. I made sure to make the opening pretty big because this was shaping up to be a reaction-based game, not precision-based. I didn't want players to get frustrated when they tried to jump through the ring, but were slightly early or late. If you jumped, you'd make it through. Along with this new obstacle, I created a difficulty step after 2 minutes, where the easiest pieces would stop spawning, and some new ones that were more difficult would start. After a good night's sleep, I wanted to try to tackle the curve pieces once more. I promised myself this would be the last time I worked on it. If I didn't solve it soon, I would stop and finally commit to only the straight and S-bend pieces. And to be honest, it did end up being a rather small and easy fix. I had just been thinking about it wrong this whole time. I was working under the assumption that I only had to worry about the spin from the previous piece to the new piece. In reality though, I needed to keep track of the accumulated spin throughout the entire run. Once I accounted for this, we had curves in the game, spinning all sorts of different directions, and it all looked perfectly smooth. I found a concrete material online and brought that in as a placeholder. I just needed to see what the track would look like when it wasn't just a flat gray. As it turns out, my testers liked it so much that it became final. DJ also had a fantastic idea for more difficult obstacles with very little effort.
Could the hazards move? Like the ones that are half Like that one, could it be like spinning?
Oh, it could! I already have a script in my toolbox that I've made for past projects that can spin an object around any of its axes. All I had to do was copy and paste new versions of the existing obstacles, apply this rotator script, and bam, spinning lasers. I was just past the halfway point for the jam time, so I definitely wanted to freeze the game design and just work on polish. Obviously, if any further ideas came up that just had to make it into the game, I'd work on them, but the goal was not to touch the gameplay code. I really believe that polishing up small details is key to making a game feel finished. For example, one thing I did was make the player's vehicle lean to the side really quick whenever it changes lanes. The boosters and checkpoints were still using their placeholder colored planes. Time to do something about that, and boosters were up first. I figure arrows are a pretty globally understood symbol for speed boosters. I drew one in Inkscape, made a simple shader graph that could scroll a texture, and boom, pretty decent booster graphics. A tip that has worked pretty well for me is to always use white to draw my artwork, so that way I can tint it with any color once it's in game. The checkpoints got their graphics overhaul next. I found some reference images that I liked which used arrows pointing inwards. I thought this would look good if I turned it into a full circle, and make the image pulse in and out. I added the word checkpoint, and used another script out of my toolbox to make its rotation match that camera. This way, you could keep changing lanes and spin around the track, and the text would always stay right side up. One thing I really liked from a game I saw last jam was showing players the inputs that they can use at the start of a round, and the round wouldn't start until they pressed one of them. This helped players learn the controls, as well as prevented surprising them by just suddenly moving forward. I made something similar. When you load into the game, you'd see arrows that show you all of the different moves you can do, and the game wouldn't start until you pressed one of them. After that first input, I thought it would be neat to have a race starting light. This was simple enough that I felt like I could model it myself. I duplicated the single light to get a row of them, and wrote a quick script to do a countdown and change the material on each light. The player was moving pretty fast already, and all my difficulty tuning had been done at that speed. So instead of trying to make them go any faster, I focused on making the player feel more speed. There were two big things that helped here. I pulled the camera back and added a lot of shake to it whenever the player crosses a boost, and I added anime-style speed lines.
It seems really fast, but honestly that's cool, as long as it's playable, you know?
It was getting late on Sunday, and I still just had the placeholder cube in the game representing the player's vehicle. This couldn't go on much longer. I knew that I wanted something like a Tron light cycle, but I had been dreading trying to make that myself in Blender. Luckily, with today's wealth of information on the internet, I found a 3D model that was pretty close to what I wanted. I didn't want to just drop that third-party asset in the game and call it finished, so I opened it up in Blender for some modifications. I removed a bunch of details around the front, since the player would never see them. I also made the bike wider and decimated the mesh to remove a lot of the high poly modeling. The change that I'm most proud of though was adding a brake light. It's a tiny detail that I think will go unnoticed most of the time, but I knew there would be somebody that used the brake and got a kick out of seeing it light up. The game was looking and feeling great at this point, but it was still 100% silent. There were no sounds or music at all. About time to change that. First up, I recorded my electric trimmer, since I thought I could get this to sound like a motor. In Unity, I made this pitch up and down based on the player's current speed. Next up, I found sound effects I could use for checkpoints, speed boosts, and hitting a laser wall. It really didn't take much time at all to put all of these in the game, and after finding a decent background track, the game felt much more alive. After the game felt refreshed with audio, I took the opportunity to try some extreme versions of the difficulty curve with something I called reflex mode. This didn't end up making it into the final game, but could return in a future release of the game. The sound effects helped a lot with letting the players know that something just happened, and whether it was good or bad. But I wanted to take that feedback a little further and make it extremely clear that reaching a checkpoint earned you 10 seconds and hitting lasers slowed you down. I did have a third text pop-up for the boosters, but those popped up so often that the game felt cluttered and they got cut. I did include one more text pop-up as an Easter egg for my friends that play Smite. There's a daily challenge in that game where you have to jump several times before a match starts. So if you jump 5 times before the round starts in this game, you'll see Smite. Continuing on with the polish, I made more of these text pop-ups for a 5-second countdown when the clock was about to run out, and even did my first voice acting to go along with it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. One feature I need to always remember to add to my 3D games is ambient occlusion. Getting the shadows just helps everything feel so much more grounded, and it's just one click. The game was pretty much done at this point. I just spent Monday doing a lot of playtesting and fixing any small bugs that came up. One big issue with random generation is the possibility to get bad or even impossible patterns. You could get speed boosts and laser traps that overlapped and made it pretty frustrating for players. Or you could get laser traps immediately after a curve that you could hardly even see coming. Since the colliders for lasers are undersized and the colliders for boosters are oversized, I decided not to implement any rules to help this. Instead, I embraced the difficulty as a bit of a metagame, even giving certain moves a name. See a booster behind a stationary laser? Use the sneaky getaway. Maybe there's a booster that you can't get because you need to jump through a ring. I'll take it to go. How about 2 opposing laser walls that are about to close a gap? Just thread the needle. And finally, if half the tunnel is blocked with lasers and it caught you by surprise, the high jumper. This game was so much fun to make. I'm not sure if I'll actually take it any further towards a release on Steam, but I know it's fun enough that I'm still playing a couple rounds every day. Either way, it's really fulfilling to look back on the weekend and see what I was able to make in just 3 days. It's also been extremely rewarding passing the game around to some of the event's streamers and seeing their first reactions to the speed and the moving obstacles.
Oh! Oh, fuck that! They move?
Whoa. Whoa, whoa. Whoa. Let's go. Checkpoint. Hostia. Oh. Oye, que ahora se mueven, ¿eh?
So we got these little boost things here. We go, woo!
Holy shit.
Oh, no! Oh! I gotta jump into those.
That's cool.
That's cool. Huh. Jump.
Oh, sick.
Oh, what? That's new. Okay. Okay, I see how it is. I see how it is. Okay. Okay. Big boy pants now. Gotcha. Nice.
And of course, thanks very much to you for watching. I'll leave you with a bit more gameplay video, and you can find links in the description if you want to play it yourself. See ya!
5, 4. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1.